Hello, everyone. This is Jana Stafford with BIC Magazine. Welcome to our webinar, How to Reduce Hand Injuries in Oil and Gas. For today's webinar, I'd like to introduce Shane Nider, Hand Safety Specialist for Superior Glove. Shane has more than 17 years of experience working in the industrial safety market with a focus on providing PPE solutions to oil and gas and construction industries. Shane, I'll now hand the mic over to you, and I want to thank you for presenting this information to our audience today.
Thanks, Jana. Absolutely. And good day, everybody. As Jana mentioned, my name's Shane Nider, Hand Safety Specialist for Superior Glove. Just want to welcome everybody on the call today. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us in a conversation around hand safety and specifically how we can reduce hand injuries in the oil and gas industry, and really looking at overall reduction in hand injuries and improving the hand safety processes and programs within your organization. I think it's important to note that we will kind of focus in on the oil and gas industry today, but the information shared in today's webinar can certainly be applied across all industries. There's a lot of similarities here, of course, some differences among different segments, but the information today can certainly be transferable as you look to improve hand safety within your organization, really no matter what industry or market segment you're working in. As Jana mentioned, this information is going to be made available. So following today's webinar, you will see a follow-up email containing the resources that we'll share and review today. You'll also have my contact information. So I absolutely encourage you to reach out to me following the webinar if you have any additional questions, if you need further support in the hand protection category. We also learn so much from the attendees when we do these information sessions. So I absolutely encourage you to use that chat feature. As we're going through the information today, I welcome you to put your questions and comments into that chat feature. We'll save a little bit of time towards the end of today's session for questions. We hope to save as much time as possible because it's really your questions, that give us good insight into the industry, and we'd love to have a discussion around those. So get the questions in. Again, if we don't have time to get to all the questions today, you'll have my contact information following today's webinar, and you can certainly reach out directly and we can get into the weeds a bit more on those specific questions. Just before we get into the main part of the presentation today, I just wanted to give you all a brief overview of who we are and what we do, but I'm sure you've guessed by our name by now, Superior Glove, that we are a manufacturer of safety gloves and related products. Superior Glove has been manufacturing hand safety products for a long time, over 100 years, since 1910. And it's really our obsession with solving problems and innovating solutions in the industry around hand safety that has really led Superior Glove to have one of the most extensive product offerings in the industry. So we have a product solution for no matter what kind of application you're dealing with, no matter how niche or unique or specific or how extreme. And we really have that manufacturing capability. It gives us the opportunity to innovate. We do the in-house testing, and really, that innovation has come a long way over the last several years. Products continue to get more dexterous, more sense of touch, more breathable, more comfortable, more cost effective. And so, there's just a lot of great things happening in this category. They really help you and help your organization build an effective hand safety program and really reduce and ideally eliminate the hand injuries within your organization. When we look at the common hand hazards in oil and gas, and really among a lot of the industrial setting, we use our hands in everything that we do, working with equipment, moving materials. And so really our hands are always really in the line of fire. And so when we look at the common hand hazards in the common industrial setting, and specifically oil and gas, here's the common hazards we come up against. Impacts. So those are forceful smacks onto the back of the hand. That could be from slipping a crescent wrench, slipping a torque wrench, maybe, pipe rolling off a pipe rack and squishing, coming and making that contact on the hand. And so there's a lot of impact hazards in the oil and gas setting. Cuts, lacerations across the hand. Number one common hazard in the industrial setting is those cuts, those lacerations across the hand, whether that's using utility knives, handling sharp objects, sheet metal, scrap metal, moving those materials that might have sharp edges. You've got puncture, so that's that stabbing motion. That could be from screws, nails, tie wire around rebar, lots of opportunity for those puncture threats. And so really just giving some insight into the common hazards in the average industrial setting, and then really using that when we're navigating through our hazard assessments. There's some other factors and some challenges that can arise when you're assessing hand safety for your organization that should be taken into consideration when you're doing your hazard assessment. We're not always looking for those physical hazards, but sometimes there's behaviors, there's personal factors that come into play. So not wearing the gloves at all, or incorrect gloves for the task. So choosing the wrong type of PPE for the application. And that's, there could be a lot of reasons for that. Maybe there's a lack of awareness on the right type of PPE, a lack of availability of the right type of PPE as we switch from different tasks, altering gloves to suit tasks. So, if the employee has to alter the glove, it might be an indication that that glove is not suitable for the task and they're being forced to modify it or get creative. Wearing the beyond the usable life, there's a lot of issues that come into play from a behavioral perspective that's outside of just these physical hazards. Do those employees need touchscreen compatibility? Do they need to look up drawings, spec sheets, and hazard analysis on their phones or smart device? Is the PPE uncomfortable? Is it too hot? Is it not offering the right type of dexterity for the application? And so when we do our hazard assessment, it's important to look for those physical hazards, impact, cuts, punctures, vibration, but it's also important to look at some of those behaviors of why the employees might not be using the PPE, or when no one's looking, they take the glove off to perform that task. And so really getting into the weeds there is important. Having that employee engagement is crucial. That's usually where we'll get some of that information as to why some of these personal factors are happening. So when we look at the physical hazards, whether it's impact, whether it's cut, whether it's puncture, heat, abrasion, the good news is that there's aligning performance standards that go, excuse the pun here, but hand in hand with hand protection. And so I think most folks on the call are probably familiar with this. Most manufacturers of PPE assign some performance standard to the PPE, letting the user know what level of performance they could expect from that glove or that PPE. So if we're looking at hard hats, safety glasses, and protective footwear, we're seeing those ANSI or those CSA markings for impact. If we're looking at hearing protection, we're looking at those noise reduction ratings. And so it's no different with hand protection. It's universal among manufacturers. So when we look at the ANSI standard, there are aligning performance standard for those hazards that we talked about: cut, impact, puncture, abrasion, heat. And so really we want to have an understanding of these performance levels. It's a graduating scale. And so whether we're looking at cut, whether we're looking at impact, whether we're looking at puncture threats, whatever the hazard might be, when we look at these aligning ANSI and ASTM performance standards, it's a graduating scale. So the higher the number, the more you could expect, the more performance you could expect from that safety glove. And so, you could look at this as, light duty, moderate duty, and heavy duty or extreme. And so as you're doing your hazard assessments, as you're looking at your different applications within your organization, you can kind of ask yourself, if I was doing this job, if I was doing this task, is this something that's, light duty, sort of light risk? I might get a bruised knuckle or a little paper cut. Is this something moderate where, it could be quite a severe laceration, maybe requiring, stitches perhaps? or is this something on the extreme side? If we get our hand in the line of fire, it could be amputation, it could be a lost finger. And so just by sort of understanding that graduating scale of the ANSI performance standards for hand protection, it can really help navigate into the right type of product. We certainly don't want to overprotect. Just because cut resistance goes up to 9 levels, that doesn't mean we want to go straight to level 9. We want to choose the right glove for the application. And a lot of times we get that question, what is the right glove? The best answer, the right glove, is the one that the employee will wear. Because you could have a prestigious hand safety program, you could buy the best product, you could have the best supply and way to manage that on site, but if the employee won't wear it, if it's not practical to their applications, they don't have the dexterity, it's not comfortable, it's too hot, the first thing that's going to happen, the glove comes off, and that's usually when a hand injury occurs. And so most hand injuries occur, well, when not wearing the glove. And so it's so important to understand what the application is and then align the PPE performance with that application, light duty, moderate, or extreme. And so that's a good indication. If you're looking at developing a hand safety program for your company, if you're looking at refining one or advancing one, I highly recommend including these minimum level performance in your program, making that information available to the workers so there's no question or guesswork, and really finding that sweet spot for each application. And a lot of times you can still keep your PPE portfolio quite narrow as well. So just a bit on performance standards, they're very key. Another reason that I wanted to talk about these performance standards is really the fact that when we go to the specific job sites, or maybe we are the site owner, perhaps we're a contractor, it doesn't matter what sort of process you're in, if that's upstream oil and gas, midstream, or downstream. Most energy companies now, if not all, have formal written on-site specific standards. So when you go to that site, whether it's for maintenance, whether it's for a full-time contract, whether it's for a shutdown or a turnaround or an outage, there is predetermined standards that those contractors, those companies need to adhere to. It's usually the site standard, so the owner's standard, and then there's a bit of variation based on application. But again, just to reiterate, when we're looking at contractual language, when we're looking at working on an oil and gas site or refinery, or again, a pipeline perhaps, there's predetermined minimum levels of performance. So here's just an example. You know, in the oil and gas industry, sweet spot between A4 and A5, maybe some impact resistance at maybe a level 2, so middle of the road. And so really understanding not only those performance hazards, but how that aligns with the contract, the site requirements, so that when you go to do a job, maybe you're working on a shutdown or a turnaround, you're sort of aware of those minimum level standards, and then can kind of go from there. So it's sort of a baseline, it's a starting point, it's a minimum level of performance, which again, we agree with. We don't want to overprotect, but we want to make sure that the PPE we're selecting aligns not only with the applications, but the site specific standards. And so they do vary. They're close in nature, but they do vary. And so if there are varying standards and you're working across the country and you're working at different sites and different GC sites, then, you know, what you could do is you could just adopt the highest standards, so that as you're working at different sites that have different standards, you're always meeting and exceeding. And so it's important to know what these minimum level standards are. It's important to know what that language means. A lot of times we do work with contractors or companies in this sector where their hand safety program is simple as wear cut resistant gloves. Well, as we talked about, there's 9 levels of cut. That's dependent on the application and the intensity, or how robust that application is. And so just by indicating cut resistant gloves, it's not good enough. It's not usually good enough for your own program. It needs to be more specific. And usually if you're working on a site, you know, whether it's a refinery whether it's a facility, they're usually going to have these predetermined safety standards in place for cut resistance, for impact, and some other things. And so the other one thing I just want to note is there is flexibility generally for variants. And so we certainly understand that, a leather driver glove with impact resistance is not going to be good for every application. We certainly understand there's chemical applications. We understand there's welding and high heat applications. And so there is flexibility. But again, the main overarching point here is just to be aware of those standards, know that there are minimum levels of performance under the ANSI standard for each of those common hazards: cut, puncture, abrasion, impact, heat, and then really aligning our applications with that performance, and then also understanding what the client's expectations are. If you're new to that site, you've won a contract, this will be the first time you're working on this site, just try to understand what their minimum levels of performance are for hand protection, and that would be a great starting point. And then really drilling more into your own specific applications, whether it's scaffolding, whether it's ironwork, whether it's welding, pipe fitting, electricians. But again, there's usually some minimum guideline. And so it is important to understand those. It's important for the workers, for the employees to understand a little bit about the performance of the PPE, so that when they're doing their walkthroughs, their hazard analysis for the day, they kind of can line that up and choose the right PPE based on those guidelines. So hand safety challenges in oil and gas. And so really not only understanding sort of the client site, but really where your company fits in the process. And that could be all three, that may be two of the three, but really understanding where in the process your company fits or plays. And really important because that's going to change the applications. If it's upstream oil and gas, there's a lot of earth moving. It's the discovery phase. There's a lot of heavy hauling. There's a lot of drilling. And so that is going to be a little bit different in terms of the hazards, in terms of the environment. And so certainly having knowledge into those specific hazards, whether they're pinch points, whether there's a lot of crush points in the drilling sector. And so whether that's midstream, so the folks that transport the product, store the product, make it available for market. And then of course, on the downstream side, probably the most diverse site, the actual refinery, where they're refining it down, they're doing those processes to make the final product to the end user. And so that is important to know where you fit, whether you're simply just working on shutdowns, whether you've got a full-time maintenance contract, whether you're doing something very specific, something maybe electrical related. And so really understanding where we fit in this process, whether it's the beginning stages of upstream, whether it's that mid stage where they're getting the product ready for market, and or really full refinement to the end user. The hazards are different, the environment's different. Yes, there's a lot of crossover and similarities, but it's important to know when those, when we look at midstream shutdown, downstream shutdown, there's a lot of new hazards that are introduced during a shutdown that may not be present during full-time maintenance. And so really understanding where you fit in that process, and then that would certainly help navigate into the right type of products. And so just a little bit about that segmentation of the process and where you might fit. But of course, lots of options and lots of different hazards within each section. And so I'm just going to throw up a quick poll question, get our juices flowing today. Have you ever implemented a hand safety initiative within your organization? So have you ever implemented a hand safety initiative within your organization, perhaps a past organization, no matter how, grand scale or how maybe basic? Have you ever implemented a hand safety initiative for your organization? And I'll just give a few seconds there. I see some stuff coming in here, so I'll let that kind of build up as people are answering. Just a few more answers coming in here. And again, doesn't matter how big in scale or how basic, all important on the road to reducing hand safety. All right, so got a good swath of answers there now. So I'm going to go ahead and publish that. And so, yeah, I would say it's almost a 50-50 split, weighing more on the yes, but about a 50-50 split between some that have and some that haven't. And so really good news there, in terms of, definitely studies have clearly shown that just by having a hand safety program or policy, no matter how basic or how far along you might be, drastically helps to reduce hand injuries. And so if you're just starting out, you don't have a hand safety program for your company, you've been tasked to develop a hand safety policy or program for your company. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to share some tips and tricks that real safety managers have used from all walks of life, including the oil and gas industry, to really help affect hand safety culture, reduce those injuries, look at some of those behaviors, and really affect change with their program for their company. And so if that's you, again, we'll go through some of that information. And of course, you'll have us as a resource as you sort of continue to navigate through that process. And so we'll go over some best practice. I'll try to share some good tips and tricks with you today as you look to navigate through that process. And so, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in the presentation, hand injuries are the most common preventable injury. So hand injuries in the average industrial settings, specifically oil and gas, specifically construction, you'll see a lot of construction in oil and gas. And so those kind of are in alignment, but hand injuries are the most common preventable injury. Back, so strains to the back, #1 injury in the industry. But I mean, I could be sitting at my desk here in my chair, I could move the wrong way and tweak my back. So hard to prevent a back injury all the time, but it is absolutely possible to prevent and eliminate all hand injuries. And when I said before, 70% of hand injuries result from not wearing any type of hand protection. And so if you look at that number, just by implementing some sort of policy around mandatory hand protection, will drastically improve hand safety within your environment. We'll start to get those injury rates down, trending in the right direction just by wearing the glove. And then really getting deeper in that is the right glove, right? So as I said before about the language, we work with a lot of companies that just, got to wear gloves. Glove on person, glove on pocket, in pocket, got to have a glove. Well, we manufacture over 500 styles of gloves. I know that's a lot, but there's a reason for that. There's so many unique applications, challenges, things to consider. And so it's really about finding not only wearing the glove, but more importantly, choosing the right glove for the application, making sure the right size is selected, making sure the employee has had a bit of feedback, insight, their perspective. At the end of the day, they're the ones doing the job. They're the ones wearing the glove. They'll give you valuable information, and we want the employees to wear it, because if not, it sort of undermines the program. And so having the glove on the hand and then taking it that one step further to really make sure that the right glove is selected. If you do those two things correctly, you'll see a drastic change in your hand injury rate. The other thing I just want to clarify on the selecting of the glove and really having the employee engaged, it will drastically increase the buy-in. We call that the IKEA effect. When somebody's part of the decision-making, part of building something, part of the process, they have a sense of ownership, a sense of pride. And so you'll find that if the employees are part of the discussion, the selection of the product, the probability that they'll adopt it and wear the gloves when they should goes up quite substantially because they were part of the process. If they feel they weren't considered and it was more of a mandate or something they're forced to do, and they're thinking, well, this glove doesn't really make sense for my application. Again, they're going to take the glove off when no one's looking, or when they need that precision, when they need that dexterity. The last comment I want to make is there's so much innovation nowadays. Employees, companies don't have to sacrifice performance for comfort. Gloves are getting thinner, more dexterous, more breathable, higher performance, more cost effective. And again, you're not sacrificing performance or dexterity. In fact, it's going the other way. The gloves are getting thinner, more sense of touch, higher performance levels doesn't translate to thicker and more cumbersome product. And so just wanted to, those two things alone, making sure the gloves are being worn, but also that the right glove is being recommended for that application. And so when we look at how we evaluate hand safety, if you're, again, just embarking on developing a hand safety program for your company, whether you're looking at maybe advancing one, here's really the three areas that we really dial into and sort of get into the weeds on. Hand injuries, so your statistics, cost analysis. So you take your, hand injury and you try to put a cost to it, because a common roadblock, a common stumbling block, a common misnomer is looking at hand safety through a single lens. And that's usually, what is the cost of the glove? What is the cost of the product? And that's fair. We understand companies work within budgets. These contracts are aggressive and competitive, and we understand we got to, have a healthy bottom line. But at the end of the day, if you can really assign an accurate cost to your hand injuries, if that's a problem for you, you'll find that your cost of your hand injuries dwarfs the cost of saving a few dollars on PPE. And so while saving costs and cost analysis on the PPE is important, really want to look at your hand injuries and try to assign a cost from that, and not be sort of penny wise and pound foolish. And so having an understanding, and then looking at your injury data analysis, we highly recommend, so, not to keep irrelevant statistics. So statistics are great, but only if they have that information. And so a lot of times when we're working with our partners and they're, we're reviewing their hand injuries and we're looking to get into the weeds, we ask for these statistics. And a lot of times it's just, was the employee wearing a glove or not? Yes or no. There was no indication of what shift it was on, what type of application, what time of day, what else might have occurred, what type of PPE was being worn, were there any other scenarios, safeguards, anything like that? Had the worker been trained? Did they understand the application? And so there's so much that can be derived from statistics, and we can pull out of statistics and look for trends and then mitigate that before it becomes a real problem, or before it happens again. And so, but you got to have that information. Statistics are only as good as the information. And so statistics are critical, but we've got to have the information. The more information, the better. And then you can decide what's important after. But really, and trying to identify the issue. Sometimes we see safety managers, they'll pull the statistics, they identified the incident, and then something else, maybe higher profile, comes up and they're off to the next challenge. So we just want to make sure that, we have that information, we're getting right to it, we're correcting that, and then we're moving on. And so, and then work procedures, that's a huge part of this. I talked about it earlier, understanding your environment, understanding what part of the process you're in. Is it the beginning stage? Is it the mid stage? Or is it that full maintenance contract at a refinery? Understanding where you are in that and what the craft is. Is it welding? Is it pipe fitting? Is it electrical? Is it scaffolding, ironwork, millwright? And so really understanding those work procedures, and then understanding those hazard performance levels. Are we providing the right PPE for the employees based on the severity of risk or the type of application? How robust or extreme or how light duty is that application? So when those three things come together, understanding where you're at today with your hand injuries, if that's a problem, understanding where you want to go, and really getting into the weeds on past day and looking for those trends, looking for those leading indicators on where your hand injuries might be coming from. Looking for trends is huge. And then again, really getting down to brass tacks, going through each of those workstations, applications. I know it's a little more dynamic on your oil and gas site. So it's, you might have multiple applications going on, and making it even more important to understand those so that we don't have, only one glove option for all applications. You won't often see a chemical and a general purpose lining up. And so you might have to have options based on your specific applications and hazards. And so these are really the three components to really structure your evaluation of your hand safety. In partnership with you, this is something we do. Again, we make the product, we manufacture the product. This is where we like to help our partners affect change in their hand safety program, or help them develop one, and really get those hand injuries going in the right direction, which is to eliminate So there's really 6 steps to eliminating and reducing hand injuries. And so really the discovery phase, understanding what your pain points are. Is it redundancy, too many products? Is it too many injuries when you're looking at your statistics? Are your hand injuries trending the wrong way? So really understanding through discovery, what is keeping you up at night? What are your pain points within this category? And then really understanding what the steps are. We do an assessment. So we, again, work together to review those applications as mentioned and really assess the environment, not just the PPE, not just going straight to, oh, what is the right glove for this application? No, what is the right approach? Can we eliminate? Can we substitute? Is there anything else we can do from an administration perspective to eliminate that hand injury or to keep those hands out of the line of fire? And of course, PPE being the last line of defense. And so really not only assessing PPE, but assessing the application in its entirety and looking for ways to eliminate, reduce, or control the hazard. After we work together to assess the environment, the applications, we provide a formal report of the findings, the specifics of the application, and then the recommendations, both recommendations on PPE, but sometimes even more importantly, recommendation on behaviors and personal factors. You know, if we put a safeguard here, you wouldn't actually need this glove at all. Or if we did this, that would drastically reduce the chance that somebody would even be in the line of fire. So it's not always just PPE solution. It's following the hierarchy of controls and looking for ways to eliminate them even getting their hands in a compromising situation. But I'll certainly admit that in the average common industrial setting, especially oil and gas, PPE is core. It's a big part of the process for sure. And so it's very uncommon you won't see some type of hand protection used on an oil and gas operation, but we just want to make sure we're not going straight to the PPE. We've considered all other factors, including those worker behaviors, and trying to mitigate it and looking at it really holistically. Once we provide that report of our recommendations, we move to trial. So we make recommendations on the PPE side of things. We'll issue the samples for trial. Again, we want the employees, we want the companies to try the product in those real world applications. And so we get the feedback. If the employees aren't comfortable, if it's not practical for their application, they'll usually speak up, they'll provide that information, they'll push back. And that's a good thing because we want to address that in the beginning. If they're not comfortable, if they're not going to wear the glove when somebody's not looking, then we haven't really done anything. And so when we can get the employees' endorsement, when we can get them to approve the product, when they can help us build the program and sort of reverse engineer it, that's really where you're going to see a lot of success in your hand safety program. We need that employee buy-in, and a big part of that employee buy-in is when we do the assessment and the evaluation, the employee engagement is key, and then having them ultimately try our recommendations and having them assess that with us. And then we can make tweaks, or maybe we're good out of the gate, but really that collaboration is key. I can't stress that enough. Evaluation. So again, ongoing evaluation, we use the word partnership. And so when we partner with you on hand safety, that's what it is. It's a partnership. It's that continuous improvement to help you develop a premier hand safety program, reduce and ultimately eliminate those hand injuries within your organization, get those costs going down, get that worker employee morale up, and really ongoing. It's not just a one and done. We're here as a partner. We want to be that hand safety resource for you. And so that as you're building your program, if things come up, you know that you've got a dotted line into us to help kind of support that. And so again, evaluation, continuous improvement, ongoing review, making sure it's current, standards change, site standards, you probably know, change, you know, one day it's cut level 5, the next day it's cut level 7. And so just really understanding when that's changing, why it's changing, how does that look in terms of or align with your hand safety program if you are working on some of these sites. And then the rollout, just rolling it out and really, again, making sure it's an effective, efficient program for you. So that's what the average hand safety approach works. And so again, if that's you, you know, we'll start off with the discovery. We understand the pain points, your pain points specifically from a PPE and a behavioral perspective. I can't stress this enough. We talked a lot about PPE today because it's a critical part of any hand safety program. You're not going to go to any energy site or construction setting and not see some type of hand protection being used or implemented. But just a good reminder that when we're doing our hazard assessment, when we're looking at building our hand safety program, when we're looking at assessing our applications, we want to follow this hierarchy of safety controls in really everything we do. Could be any PPE category for that matter, but physically remove the hazard is the ideal scenario. If we can't, we want to substitute or replace the hazard. We work with a lot of companies that carry hazardous materials, chemicals, hot liquid for roofing applications, and we've had really bad hand injuries. And so an engineering control that's adopted is using material handling carts, not even handling the material, letting the cart handle the material. You're away from it, you're away from the line of fire. So if we can use engineering controls, we're going to want to do that. And these are the recommendations as we partner with you and we're reviewing your environment, your work site. These are some of the things we're looking at. Is there something we can do outside of just great PPE? And so we're looking for those engineering controls, administrative controls, training. Do the workers know what type of gloves to access, where to access, how to access? And then of course, PPE being the last line of defense. So I think it's a good reminder just to keep that flow in mind as we're doing our hazard assessments. The report, so again, it's really important to actually formalize that so we can qualify and start to quantify. Are we actually reducing hand injuries? Are our mutual efforts actually affecting change, getting those injuries to go down? So without that data, without that formal information, kind of hard to validate that. So definitely formal recommendations based on our mutual findings, based on our hazard assessment. The trial, again, it's not, one of those things where, it's a glove, fits like a glove. It's got to be the right size. It's got to be the right performance and the right comfort for the application. It's got to be practical. Otherwise, first thing that happens, glove comes off, and that's when we're at that line of fire. And so it's so key to get that trial, to get the feedback before any glove is implemented. Make sure that the employees weigh in and that they'll actually wear it. Because if they'll actually wear it, that everything else will come into play quite nicely. But if the employee won't wear it, it certainly undermines everything else. The evaluation, is the hand injuries going up? Are they going down? How do we pivot? How do we affect change? Where are those coming from? So just a reminder on those statistics, keeping detailed information, not just was the glove being worn or not. What type of glove was being worn? Is it appropriate for the application? How is that PPE being accessed? Does the worker have to go to the tool crib and show the tool crib attendee the awareness in their glove as some sort of trade-in? Because if they do, eventually they may, well, I don't want the hassle. I don't want to have to go prove that I need new gloves every time I need a new glove. Making that PPE available to the employees when they need it. And so really just keeping that good statistical data, evaluate how that's being managed, how your PPE is being managed, how it's being distributed to the workers, how the workers are being trained. Do they understand the performance levels of the product? So all of that record keeping and information is so key to looking for trends and again, that continuous improvement to reducing and eliminating your hand injuries. The launch, so working together to roll that out and making sure that we've crossed all the T's and dotted the I's. And again, it's a formal program. We're here as your partner. And so again, I just want to reiterate, if that's you, no matter where you are in your journey towards hand safety, there's a lot of resources out there. There's lots of tips and tricks that real safety managers have used to really reduce their hand injuries by 50, 80, even up to 90% in a lot of cases. And so the goal here is just to take those small steps. You don't need to eliminate your hand injuries in year one. That would be great. That would be amazing and ideal. However, micro wins are great too. 10% reduction injury year one, 20% the next year, and just seeing those hand injuries going the right direction, celebrating those wins with the employees, keeping that culture up, and really, again, it's just continuous improvement. You kind of want to take small bites. We don't need to eat the elephant in one bite. So just those little micro wins. And again, having that employee collaboration is so key. And so how we bridge the information gap, as I mentioned, as the manufacturer, we've got a lot of great resources out there. And so, as I said, we do have a lot of solutions based on application in the oil and gas sector. And so one thing, just from a resource perspective, we do, if you go to superiorglove.com in the catalog section, there's some great resources there for you. We do have the full line catalog, but we've also broken the product selection down by hazard. So if you're only interested in vibration, if you're only interested in chemical, if you're only interested in cut resistance or impact, you'll be able to go straight to those hazards and then get that information from a product perspective, from a technical perspective. One thing that we also offer the industry are hand safety guides. They go well beyond product. It's an actual guide to hand safety for this industry. So we work with best in class oil and gas or energy companies, and we work on their job sites following that assessment approach. And then we build a reference guide. It's not an end all to be all. We certainly understand that there's different applications, different craft, different processes upstream, downstream, and everything in between. And so it's a guide, but it really covers off, you know, the approach, common applications from the common core craft being the pipe fitters and the welders and the iron workers and the electricians. And so it's a guide that's a reference document by application, by trade, and some of the trade specific information. So if you're only concerned about boiler makers, you can go to the boiler maker section. You can understand some of the hand safety challenges boiler makers face, and you can go straight to that resource. What type of recommendations we make. Where did that information come from? Again, best in class boiler makers, the folks that are boiler makers, the folks that do the job day in and day out. We're the experts at making gloves. We're not always the expert at every application. So we get the information from the folks that do these jobs, that wear the product, that do the job day in and day out. And so these hand safety guides are really built by the industry. And so it's a fairly credible document, but again, not the end all to be all. And so highly recommend downloading a copy of that from the website and going through it. And maybe there's some good information you can use from that to implement into your hand safety program. Maybe you're looking to do some toolbox talks or ongoing training with the employees. A lot of great resources here, a lot of great reference material you can pull out and use. Maybe it's just understanding those performance standards. And then, of course, where we really like to help our partners is that one-on-one. Partnering on a hand safety journey. Again, we're the manufacturer. We don't sell the gloves. We do that through our distribution partners, but we manufacture. We're here to provide that technical expertise, and it starts with that discovery. We have a conversation. What keeps you up at night? What are your challenges? What are your pain points in the hand safety category? And then again, we work together to start to mitigate that and go the right direction. So, you know, a lot of times we, you know, Shane, this is all great, but we just don't have the resources. I'm a one-person show in the safety department. I'm working on multiple things. I just don't have the resources to do all of this, even though it sounds great. That's what we're here for. We're here as your partner. We've got hand safety specialists across North America and every region who are always looking forward to working with our partners. And so if that's you, we can do some of the heavy lifting. So don't think you have to take on that journey on your own. We can certainly help do some of that heavy lifting. So it starts with a conversation and we sort of explore from there. If you go deeper into the hand safety guide, again, just look, it's a pretty intuitive document, lots of ways to access that. There's, you know, QR codes that can be accessed. So if the employee wants to pull up this reference material when they're right on site, that's always ideal. Putting posters up with the download information where PPE is being accessed, always a great idea. So again, this is a great resource that can be used in so many different ways to support your hand safety initiatives. trade specific profiles. So again, if you're just curious about welding, just curious about the mill rates, or you can go straight to the trade specific pages and pull that information out. And then what is quite common are glove selection guides. So as we make those recommendations are adopted. We then plot that out on a selection guide. So it's, again, may not be the end all to be all, but it's very specific applications, usually by trade, and then what the recommendation products are for those applications. And so it's a reference guide. Hey, I'm a boiler maker. What are the 3 gloves that I should be using? Well, here's the core glove, the everyday glove. And then here's some other options if I'm doing something a little bit more unique. Maybe there's a higher heat process, or maybe there's a unique situation. But these selection guides can be very helpful from a training perspective, from a worker or employee educational perspective. Hey, you're contracting with us. Hey, you're coming to our site. Hey, you're coming to work with us at this client location. Here's the expectation. And by the way, we have a reference document making it even easier. So you don't have to try and guess what type of appropriate hand protection might be available. It's sort of been plotted out for you. But again, these are some of the resources you'll find in the hand safety guide on our website, superiorglove.com. And so you can kind of get creative with it. You can edit it. You can use certain bits and pieces to sort of help build your own hand safety program that's relevant for your environment and your applications. And so with that, as promised, we wanted to just save a bit of time for questions. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jana. She's going to open up the chat log there, but just wanted to thank everybody for their time today and for joining in on today's information session. Jana?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Shane. So yeah, we do have some questions that have come in during Shane's presentation. And so one of the attendees asks, how can we make sure employees are wearing the right PPE gloves for the job?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And again, I think there's a few different things you can do, but one of the best ways that you can ensure that employees are wearing the right PPE for the job is to involve them in the process. I know I've said that a lot today, but it's so important. It's so effective. If they're considered, if they have a chance to voice, a day in the life of a boiler maker, a day in the life of an iron worker, they're going to have that information. They're going to share that information. Some employees aren't going to speak up. They're going to take the PPE and then they're going to get creative with it. And so a lot of times they appreciate when they're considered. And so again, if you want to have good buy-in, if you want to have good success with implementation, make the employees part of it. It doesn't have to be every employee. It could be a focus group. It could be one person from each core trade or craft that you might have or application. So develop a focus group. You could find the detractor, the person that's pushing back. No, we don't use any gloves. I've never seen a glove that's ever worked. If you can involve them in the process and they can become a champion, that's even better. Because if we can win that person over, then everything kind of falls into place. So understanding the applications is big. Again, the employee will help with that. But understanding the applications, if you don't understand enough about the application and you're trying to make recommendations back to the employee, you might give them gloves that make absolutely no sense for that application. They're too bulky. They just aren't the right performance. They're just a placebo. They're not actually providing the right type of protection for what they're doing. And so involve the employees and understand the application. If those two things come together, and the last thing I'll say is making the PPE accessible. Highly recommend no trade-in process where you're making the employees validate that their gloves are worn down enough to the point where they deserve a new pair. Eventually they'll just say, you know what, I don't like the hassle I get at the tool crib, so I'm just going to wear these longer, or I'm going to go without. There's lots of good vendor managed inventory situations, vending machines, a lot of good systems. I'm not suggesting putting a bin on the floor and having it be a free-for-all, but certainly making the PPE accessible to the employees is big. So yeah, a couple tips there for increasing employee buy-in.
Okay, I think you just touched on this a little bit, but one person says, I have no control over what workers wear. How can I have an impact?
That's really a challenge for sure. So if you have no control over what the employees wear, We need to really understand where that control is being delivered from or how you fit in that process. And so really you need to make top down. It needs to be top down. Everybody in the company needs to adopt and endorse the initiative to reduce hand injuries if it's a problem for your company. Because if you don't get that top down buy-in, absolutely, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. I mean, if your supervisors, if your upper crest CEOs don't really endorse or buy into the initiative to reduce hand injuries, yeah, it's going to be an uphill battle. So you need to make it important to them. Wherever you're getting that pushback, make it important to them. If it's from a procurement perspective, bring those key performance indicators forward on how you can actually reduce costs by implementing better gloves or better processes or better hand safety policy. The cost of the glove might be more, but if you can quantify how you can reduce injuries by putting more processes in place, that'll resonate with a procurement perspective, a CEO. So make it meaningful to the person that you're trying to collaborate or where you're getting that pushback. So if you don't have control, kind of need to understand where those barriers are, who does have control, and how you can involve that person into the process and make them look good and help to affect change.
Okay. And then someone else says, are leather gloves resistant to any chemicals?
Traditionally, no. I mean, we do have some oil and water resistant gloves in the leather category. So those are going to give a little bit of holdout from permeation on oil and water, but certainly not from a chemical, benzene or toluene or anything like that. But we do have very similar leather gloves with the gauntlet, the impact in chemical resistant, like a nitrile or a chemical resistant material. So the short answer is no. Generally, leather is not going to give you any protection from chemical.
Okay. Do you truly believe all hand injuries can be eliminated?
That is the goal. I think that we do believe that all hand injuries can be eliminated simply because there's really no reason why they shouldn't. We have a lot of resources we can support on building an effective hand safety program. We can offer the right PPE, we can offer the right training, we can educate and address some of those behaviors and cultural challenges. But at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world if you do have a hand injury. It's unfortunate, depending on the severity, it could be really unfortunate, but it's an opportunity to improve. And I think that companies that we work with that have completely eliminated hand injuries have done a lot of great things, from eliminating the hazards altogether, training, addressing culture, the right PPE, understanding that better gloves may cost more, but if you look at it holistically, you actually drive the costs down quite a bit. And so, yes, we truly believe that all hand injuries can be eliminated, but it's not an over the night thing. It's something you got to keep working at. And even if you go from 10% to 99%, that's a huge win, and keep working at that 1%. So it's possible, may take time, may take longer in certain industries and environments, but it is possible, and it's something that we should absolutely work towards. And it's something we shouldn't beat ourselves up if we don't reach it right away. It's a noble goal to work towards.
Okay, how can we make sure management is purchasing the correct hand PPE and not just picking the cheapest gloves?
Again, really doing that formal process, really getting into the weeds. Again, all starts with that discovery, whether that's between you and your manager, you and purchasing. Certainly appreciate that the safety manager is really concerned about getting their injuries down. It's keeping them up at night. And the procurement side is generally on the cost control. So it's like, how do we get those two entities to come together and really collaborate? Because again, they're both important. We understand that those key performance indicators are both important, but how do we bring those two together? So really validating, hey, I know I'm recommending that we're implementing slightly more cost PPE, but here's how it's going to drastically affect us on the injury reduction side, our costs. And so you need to be able to quantify that. If you can't, it's going to be tough. It's just going to be more expensive PPE. But if you can quantify and say, hey, by implementing this PPE, It's going to cost us 20% more, but we can reduce our hand injuries by 60%. Huge cost savings there. But you got to be able to quantify it. If you're not keeping those statistics, it's going to be hard to qualify those injuries. So it's really just looking at cost through a broader lens than just the cost of the PPE. How many SKUs do we have? How are we supplying that? Is there a supply chain issue? Do we have it when it's needed? What's our consumption rate? Are we going through way too many gloves because it's economy? It's not high performance. So there's a lot of ways to look at cost. And so we got to start looking at it holistically if we want to really get those other folks that are in control of cost control to see that, to quantify it. And so kind of need all hands on deck to really affect change in your hand safety program.
Okay, someone asks, we need a better, more targeted hazard assessment to choose the best glove. Do you have any tips to help us with this?
Yes, I think one of the best tips I can provide you is following the webinar. If you wanted to reach out to me, I'll provide you a couple of examples of some of the assessment records we use. There's quite a few hazard assessments out there, so you could even Google and see some of the templates out there. But I'll be happy to provide some, because you're right, it's not just what's the hazard, what's our glove recommendation. A lot of the good assessment forms show like what the environment is, what the conditions are, what current PPE is being used, is the employee happy with that current PPE, other elements at play, wet, cold, touch screen, what's holistically going on here. So if your hazard assessment just says, what's the hazard, what glove do we use? It's not enough. We want to go deeper, and that's really how we can get into the weeds. So my advice is to either reach out to us and get a couple of examples that have worked for us and other companies, and or develop one for yourself. And it really is just making sure that there's enough information there on, what's going on in your environment from a physical hazard perspective and a behavior perspective. And then you could almost create your hazard assessment form following the hierarchy of controls.
Okay, and this question, Shane, is about contractors. How would you suggest managing the glove PPE requirements for our contractors, subcontractors, and suppliers coming to our site?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you're the site owner, absolutely, and I know this is quite common, but establishing minimum expectations for PPE when those subcontractors come to site. You're working in our backyard. This is what we've determined as our minimum standard, and we would want you to align with that. So having that information ahead of time, and then also understanding that there's usually variance. So there's a general rule of thumb when you come to those sites. And then if there's variation based on specialty application, they're really open for that. It's just a process. If you're the contractor, if you're going to these sites to do some in periodic maintenance or specific work during a shutdown, I would definitely look for the highest standard between those sites, because they're usually quite consistent, but I'd look for the highest standard. Maybe one site has level 5 cut and the other site has level 4 cut. You're working at both. I would standardize to level 5. That way, no matter what site you're working at, you meet or exceed. But certainly aligning your hand safety program with your client sites is always a good idea, but also understanding what those expectations are. If you are the client site, you absolutely want to make that information available to your contractors, to your subcontractors, to those trades. Hey, come into our site. This is the expectation.
Okay. So we have just a couple more questions before we close out today. So someone asks, do you have the capabilities of implementing the hand safety program beyond Canada and US?
Can you read that one more time? Sorry, Jana.
That's okay. Do you have the capabilities of implementing the hand safety program beyond Canada and US?
We do, yes. We do have coverage across the globe. I'm not going to say in every corner of the globe, but absolutely across the globe. We do have guys like myself, people like myself to help with that. So yes, short answer, yes, we can accommodate and support your hand safety initiatives across the globe.
Okay. And the last question we have today, actually, one just came in. What is the first step involved in the one-on-one with the hand safety specialist service you offer?
Reaching out to Superior Glove myself is a good place to start, since you know me now. And once I understand where you are, what region you're in, I will connect you with our hand safety specialist in that region. They'll connect with you on that discovery piece. And that's when you folks will start to talk about those pain points. What's keeping you up at night? And then the partnership begins. How basic or how advanced is sort of up to the discovery call. And so just really getting in touch with us, and we'll get you in touch with our person for that region.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, well, the last question is just simply about asking if there's going to be follow-up information, which I know there will be, and I'll mention that. So that's it for us today. Thank you, Shane, and thanks again to our sponsor, Superior Glove. So like I said, please be on the lookout for follow-up information coming from Shane and Superior Glove. You can visit them anytime at superiorglove.com. On behalf of everyone here at BIC Magazine, I'd like to thank you for attending. You can watch and share the recorded presentation in about 2 hours at bicwebinars.com or by using the same link you used today. Please bookmark bicmagazine.com for daily access to articles and videos on current news, trends, industry expansions, and technical knowledge you need to stay ahead in your business. Everyone have a wonderful and safe day.